Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Hi there, and welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth with me, your host, Peter Robbins. We are broadcasting on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. We do so every Monday, 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can listen live by going to KGRA Digital Broadcasting. Go to the top of the page and click on Livestream, and you are there. If you want to subscribe to KGRA and you use my first name as your entry code, PETER, you get a 30% discount, whether it's for a month or a year. No need to thank me. Anyway, a change of pace show tonight. It's very cold and wintry where I am, and it made me think more and more about friends and colleagues in California. So with the exception of me, this is an all California show. My first guest, Earl Grey Anderson, is MUFON State Director of Southern California. He is an executive member of MUFON's ERT, the Experiencer Resource Team, and hosted both Experiencer workshops at last year's MUFON Symposium in Denver. We'll host the same events at this year's in Cincinnati. Earl has personally investigated more than 900 UFO reports and specializes in experiencer high strangeness cases. He's been a guest on many radio shows, including this one, podcasts, TV shows, such as Unidentified with Demi Lovato, the Travel Channel's Storming Area 51 special, and the season finale of Motor Trend Television's Motor Mythbusters, Cars versus UFOs. You gotta love it. Earl will be representing MUFON's Experiencer Resource Team in the upcoming Ancient Aliens episode and teaches an accredited course in ufology at Los Angeles' Otis College of Art and Design, which I had the honor of addressing last year. He is a native of Southern California, a published singer-songwriter, guitarist with 3 CDs under his belt. He dotes on his 3 children, his 3 grandchildren, and lives happily with his wife, Lisa, and their cat, Thor. Gino Mergilino is the state chief for California, section director, the state chief field investigator for Southern California, and has been a member of MUFON for 4 years. Although Gino is strongly interested in nuts and bolts sightings, he has recently closed several unknown cases, including one with actual video footage of another involving a triangle-shaped craft over the Los Angeles area, which was observed by a large crowd of witnesses back in the early 90s. Gino is a Gretsch Guitar-endorsed professional guitarist and singer who writes, records, and performs all around the world, including at large festivals, tours, and television appearances. As a magician, he has tackled everything from rock to country and even jazz, although he is well known in the Southern California area for working with many top acts in the rockabilly genre. Besides having a lifelong passion for the UFO phenomena, Gino also has an interest in many areas of the unknown and has been active member of the Southern California Paranormal Investigation Group for many years. He is licensed to fly aerial drones for commercial clients and is also a certified paraglider and I think that's Greg Bishop, the leftover because Greg wasn't able to join us. Continuing on, our third guest, Jeff Krause, has investigated and researched UFOs most of his life and is the former MUFON State Director for Southern California. Additionally, Jeff is the current state section director of MUFON Tri-County, a member of the MUFON STAR Team, and a field investigator as well. Jeff has investigated many fascinating cases, including the San Luis Obispo SLO UFO case and the encounter at Edwards Air Force Base, articles about which can be found on the UFO Digest website. Jeff is also the author of the blog, The Field Investigator's Toolbox, and is currently working on 2 books, The Field Investigator's Toolbox Volume 1 and the SLO UFO, and a documentary on UFOs in the state of California that will soon be released on Amazon Prime Videos. His current project involves research into the Native American Chumash culture, and correct me if I'm pronounced that wrong, Jeff, and they're interacting with the Star People, a theme that seems to be replicated throughout the world during many ancient eras, and a planned expedition to record pictographs left behind in caves by the tribe that used to inhabit the Los Padres National Forest in the San Luis Obispo coastal area. That said, Earl, Gino, Jeff, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Hi, Peter.
Hello there, Peter.
Gentlemen, I would say if you didn't know where we were and you had to guess which one of us is not in California right now by what we are wearing.
Short sleeves here.
Rub it in.
I'm sorry, Peter. I love you. You know that, bro.
Don't even need a t-shirt either.
Gino, please pronounce your last name for Peter. I still, once in a while, I still
it's not even close.
Mess it up.
Maragalano.
It's a hard G. Miragalano.
Just like
It's a beautiful Italian
The
name.
man.
Okay. This is a show we can take in a number of directions. I just thought it would be great to spend some time with ufologists, musicians, people who grew up with some of the same tunes I did, have a background in the arts as well as this work that we do, and talk UFOs and music. And I wanted to begin, and not necessarily at the same time. Some of what we'll be talking about has nothing to do with UFOs. I know it's a shock, but you will recover. And with that, I want to begin by asking you each a little about the first music you remember, the music you grew up with. Maybe it was the music that your parents played, but some early memories like that. And I'm going to ask Jeff, will you begin?
Oh, certainly. Well, the first question first, though, the first music I remember is the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, and I Want to Hold Your Hand, and my aunt holding my hand and singing along with me, you know. So that obviously was something that stuck with me forever.
Wow.
That was history. But as far as my parents' music, it's the kind of stuff that dentists torture you with, and you find in broken elevators and places like that, which I always thought was rather odd considering they both had musical backgrounds growing up. But growing up for them was back in the 30s and 40s. And they were big band fans, which big band stuff I could tolerate. Some of it was pretty good and kind of the precursor to jazz and intermingled a lot. But again, the stuff that they seemed to stick with the most was the kind of stuff that you would rather slip on your entrails while trying to iron your spleen than listen.
Got it. Gino, early musical memories?
Well, I actually kind of come from a musical family. My father, grandfather, uncles, brothers, all musicians. So there was always music around when I was a kid. Mostly it was, oddly enough, a combination of country western and jazz, and big band jazz. My dad played about 5 instruments, and at any given time he played trumpet, big band trumpet, or he played country western and sang. And I remember I always tell the story. My mom's side of the family originally came from Texas. My grandmother and my great grandmother, and
Are we
my
related?
nursery rhymes and my lullabies were Hank Williams. I knew Hank Williams songs when I was 3 years old.
Love it.
Wow.
And I
That's
listened to
beautiful.
almost nothing but country until I was about 14. And one of my sisters gave me I think a Rolling Stones cassette tape. And that
Oh
ruined
boy.
If I can interject really quick,
There
I
you
didn't
go.
know that about you, Gino, but that's amazing because my dad was a big band trumpet player and my mom was from Texas. So,
That's crazy.
I
I didn't
love
know
it.
that.
wow, what a coincidence.
Synchronicity, baby.
Earl, some of your early childhood musical memories, either through your folks or what you were
Sure.
hearing from siblings, or
I
your first
was
awareness of music.
I was a goner. I was going to have to be a musician, and because it was all around me. My dad was a classical vocalist, so I grew up with him singing opera, Verdi, and he would always sing in productions of Handel's Messiah or Beethoven's Mrs. Solemnis,
Sure.
or that sort of thing. My mom she gravitated more towards contemporary stuff, but now this is kind of neat. She had Odetta's first album because she knew Odetta
Oh, for
was
gosh sakes.
the daughter of the cleaning lady for this theater in Santa Monica called Turnabout Theater that my mom and her uncle frequented, and were friends with everybody. My uncle acted and did musical theater and stuff like that there. One of my earliest memories was in our kitchen in Venice, California, our yellow kitchen, the same kitchen where my mom went and did her disclosure number with me around the same age.
Oh gosh.
But she invited Odetta to come over to our house.
As
And
one does.
And I was like 4 or 5 years old, so we had the record. It was
We have
kids.
to stop for a moment and explain to folks that Odetta in the early 60s was one of the focal forces in the folk movement revival and in the civil rights movement.
Mm-hmm.
She was a formidable presence with an extraordinary voice and charisma to spare. Keep going.
Well, she sat down in our kitchen and she played Froggy Went a Courtin', which is perfect for a 4-year-old. And Bob Dylan says that Odetta was his greatest influence. And but that was me when I was 3 years old, and she was just it was just this normal thing to see somebody sit down and back themselves up with a guitar and tell stories that way with their singing stories with their own voice. It was normalcy, so I grew up into it.
Love that you all have real roots in professional musicianship. And in my growing up, my parents came of age. They were what we will call grown-ups by the time the big band era rolled around. And that was some of the background music that I grew up with and have still a lot of affection for it. My mom had an extraordinary singing voice. She actually had a 3-octave range and would sometimes sing at the drop of a hat when friends would come over, which always was this combination for me of great pride and great embarrassment, because your mother just bursts into song when your goofy junior high school friends are over. And she had been invited when she was a teenager in high school to be a big band singer and go on the road. And not surprisingly, her mother, my grandparents are Russian immigrants and came over right at the end of World War I. No, her teenage daughter was not going on the road with a bunch of musicians in a big bus touring the country and who knows what.
Hooligans.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
The next thing I'm kind of curious about is, we all find our own niche in pop music. We find the songs inevitably that become our anthems, our support systems, sometimes our inspirations. or just the background music that maybe leads us a little astray. When I think of the lyrics to some of the great love songs that we grew up with, whether or not it was, rock and roll or rockabilly or country western, or of course, just great doo-wop and Motown, some of the messages that they gave us were somewhat faulty, I think, in the real world. I'm half, now I'm whole. I'm nothing without you. I can't live anymore without you. These are not the healthiest messages to give. In many ways, we all bought into it in a way,
Right?
I mean, again, we are a small demographic here. It would be nice to have a more representative group than 4 white guys, but that's what we're stuck with tonight. And we all had girlfriends that broke up with us at somewhere along the line. And there may be a song associated with that. And then maybe songs that helped get us out of it. For me, I will say, being old enough to remember the assassination of John Kennedy, who I here worshipped, it was the saddest event in my life at that point, not involving the death of a relative. And the first thing that began to get me out of it, remembering that it was November 1963, by February of 1964, this group from England was starting to be played on American AM radio stations. And I heard some of those first songs and thought they were wonderful. Just at that point where, I'm starting to really be attracted to girls, and it all makes sense. And hooray for the Beatles.
Yeah.
For you guys, was there a point where you kind of fell for, or the first group that was like your group, aside from the Beatles maybe, but the one that, I can talk to this, I can talk to other guys about this group of musicians? I never was much of a sports person. Well, that's putting it mildly. So when people talked about batting averages, I'd nod and smile. I still don't know how to figure them out, and that's okay with me. I like that. I don't know how to play solitaire, and that's okay with me too. But for me, the moment I discovered the early Who, that was it. I was fine. I didn't need much else. The Who,
Live
the
at
Rolling
Leeds,
Stones, the Beatles,
album.
or the Holy
That
Trinity.
was the best live album still, I think, that ever came out.
Live at Leeds. Wow.
Sure.
Wow. What a great album.
Earl, was there a time when, did you come through the folk movement, or was there a point where this is my musician, this is my mentor, this is who I'm learning from, or this is my group right now, and it was a way to connect with other kids, etc.?
I started with a little folk guitar that Mom got with green chip stamps, and then the next Christmas, when I was, I think, just turned 13, I finally got my first electric guitar, which she also got with green chip stamps.
What a cool mom!
I know. I mean, she wasn't working at that time. It was my dad was the only breadwinner. But the Beatles had the same effect on me. I'll never forget the Ed Sullivan Show, and I was only like 5, almost 6 years old, I guess, when that happened. And I remember my parents and my uncle laughing at them and making fun of their hair, and they probably have nits, and and I'm just like sitting there. It was like a revelation. It was happy music, and it was medicine for melancholy, to quote Ray Bradbury. It truly was. I think that it saved us from national depression from Kennedy being shot. It was the first time I could, Mom seemed to, even though they were laughing a little bit. And what's funny is my uncle, just like 3 years later, he discovered Sgt. Pepper when it came out. And he would have these big parties. He was very dramatic and stuff, he'd have a big party, and then he'd have everybody sit down and he would play a record. It would usually be a jazz album or something like, something of that sort. Well, he put Sgt. Pepper on the stereo. It was 1967. So I was 9 years old. And it was the music was so colorful, and it just took off. And talk about music being a revelation. And so I was a Beatles guy all the way, you know, until I junior high school, you know, Jimi Hendrix and things like that. You know, junior high school, yeah, I discovered psychedelic rock and things like that. But I owe it all to the Beatles, you know. And I'm like that. I mean, I'm obsessive about two things in life: UFOs, and I'm a Beatles obsessive. You know, I listen to more Beatles podcasts than UFO podcasts. Don't tell anybody. I listen to yours, or I have to point the different direction here. I listen to your podcast, Peter, but you know, I'm still obsessed with the Beatles.
Given my podcast and the Beatles, it's a fair choice. Gino, I'm particularly curious, growing up in a very musical family with the people that you knew and loved, these adults around you making music. Do you remember a point where at some point, you know, as a kid, you heard a song or a group or an individual, and it was that revelation of, I just discovered this guy or this group. This is mine. This is something, not my parents. I've got my own music starting now, and this is cool. Or was it more inheriting just a sense of a love of different kinds of music and sort of adding it to your mental repertoire as you went?
A little bit of both. I mean, there was definitely an aha moment, but you know, having music around quite a bit. We did have a lot of different types of music in the house. I'm the youngest of five. So my older sisters, you know, you had to hear the Beach Boys and the Beatles, and that kind of stuff. So that was there in the house. You know, my mom listened to almost nothing but country, and my dad played in a country western band and on his nights after work, you know, and there was jazz, of course. So I listened to a lot of country, but there was the other stuff in there. I loved the Beach Boys and Chuck Berry and stuff when I was a kid. That was fun kid music, you know. And like I said, somewhere around, I don't know, 12, 13, something like that. One of my sisters gave me some cassette tapes to listen to. Cassette tapes. Remember cassette tapes? Give me some tapes to listen to and to borrow. And one of them was Get Your Ya-Ya's Out. And another one I saw the cover in my mind. I think the Monkees' Greatest Hits or something like that. Yeah. You know, so I was getting slowly indoctrinated into that. But there was a point in junior high school when I had an aha moment. And before I even tell you that, I'll tell you, you know, I was given a trumpet when I was about 10 or something.
Oh boy.
Horns, a lot of horn players in my family. Didn't take to it. I just didn't like it. My parents didn't push music. Their, you know, instruments were around. They said, if you want to play, you play. At one point I told my dad, I wanted to play pedal steel. Cool. I don't know if you know what pedal steel is. It's a specific type of instrument, mostly for country western. And my dad said, that's great. Those are expensive. There's a guitar over there. You can play that. So I picked around a guitar a little bit. But in junior high school, I heard Van Halen. And I had never heard anything like that up until that point. And that was definitely like, wow, what is that? You can do that with a guitar? That's a thing? And I was pretty obsessed from that point on. That was my big left-hand turn. And as I've gotten older, you know, and I'm sure Jeff and Earl say the same thing, you have more of those as you go on, you know, and like you mentioned, becoming the family that I came from, the music around, I've always been open to different types of music and always open to finding new things. But yeah, Van Halen really just blew my mind.
You got a little truckload of guitar players here, Peter. All three of us play lead guitar. I mean, Jeff does a killer Jimi Hendrix, man. I heard him do Star Spangled Banner, Jimi Hendrix style, and he rocks.
I'm going to have to hear that sometime. Yes. Before we go on, I just want to
can you do it behind his back?
No, you can. I know you can.
Closed, brother.
One Beatles related memory.
And I can pick with my teeth too. So.
When
my teeth started breaking, I can't do that anymore.
We'll take them out and then use them down here.
So I want to know now, when each one of you at a certain point picked up a guitar and started to play, there is no way that you can't do that and have fantasies, projections, thoughts about what may be the future, or at one point, such and such, my favorite legendary inspirational guitarist, picked up a guitar for the first time and he didn't know shit any more than I do about playing a guitar. Who is your first favorite guitarist? Earl.
The first rock concert I ever went to was Chicago at the Hollywood Bowl, and I had the absolute honor of getting to hear Mr. Terry Kath, who Jimi Hendrix said was the superior guitar player to him. Just, I mean, he was a force and so amazing. And it made such a great impression on me. I mean, the first thing I wanted was a distortion pedal and a wah-wah pedal, you know. And my dad went with me to that concert. You know, he was afraid that I was going to imbibe in the devil's herb or something like that.
Of
you know,
course.
God forbid. And my dad wound up walking away from that concert with a whole new respect for rock music. Before he thought he would make fun of it. And he saw Chicago, and his whole attitude was it changed. He said, "Those guys are really talented, son. You can play their albums anytime you want." You know, they started out as a heavy band, though. People don't know that. I mean, they kind of got the syrupy ballads.
Yeah.
Jeff, first favorite guitarist for you?
Oh, easily Jimi Hendrix. You know, I mean, I grew up paying attention to guitar. Fortunately, I had a sister 10 years older than me. You know, and I saw guitarists on TV like Glenn Campbell and the Smothers Brothers and you know, stuff like that.
Sure.
Well, yeah, that's nice. But then
Glenn's
Jimi
good.
Hendrix, you know,
Glenn's probably better than me.
that right there, I knew what kind of music I was going to play the rest of my life from that moment on. And of course, you know, I added other influences in and many other styles, but my main motivation and what really got me fired up was Jimi Hendrix all the way.
I'm old enough to remember when the first album, Jimi Hendrix Experience, came out, and it was a revelation. It was such an exciting time to be around, and you know, every couple of weeks, you know, they were making it up as they went along, but it was such a glorious moment in the history of pop music. Gino, your first favorite guitarist?
Man, that's a really hard question.
Fair enough. Your first favorite guitarists, plural.
I mean, and if you ask me tomorrow, I'll probably give you a different list of people. If I was going to be really honest, even though I don't think I knew what his name was at the time, if I was real honest, probably Don Rich. He's the guitar player for Buck Owens. I used to watch him on Hee Haw every week, and I listened to Buck Owens when I was a kid. That's probably the most honest answer. Really, it's probably more Eddie Van Halen. At least going back when I was a kid, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
High school, teenager, but that changes all the time. I could tell you, you know, Frank Zappa, Al Di Meola. I'm a huge Tal Farlow fan. Who was an insane jazz guitarist.
Zappa's definitely in my list of all-time favorites.
Well, I'm about to
Hendrix,
really make you guys jealous, because years ago when I worked in theater management, we had a big benefit one night at a fabulously sleazy nightclub in Lower Manhattan that became very famous as a cocaine distribution point. Not that I was imbibing. It was a deconsecrated church too. So the Limelight, a legend in New York nightlife, and the theater company had a party there to honor our artist in residence and the most brilliant stage actress I've ever seen in my life, who was Geraldine Page. And I don't remember how it exactly happened, but we asked Frank Zappa if he would like to come and, you know, honor Miss Page, and he was there. And I emceed the event, and Jerry was making a movie somewhere, but I got to meet him and hang with him, and Helen performed that night. So
nice.
It was, she was just very upset that nobody was there to take her picture with Frank Zappa, and who can blame her?
Now everybody's got their silly camera with them, you know.
Pretty ugly sometimes, as we know. I want to add one thing about early Beatles memory. as a kid, I remember watching them on Ed Sullivan as well. But I had a friend in, I guess it was junior high, who was British, and she and her older sister and mom and dad lived in our village for several years because her dad, well, quite a while, worked for Lloyd's of London that had offices in town. And the girls, myself, their mom, the dad, and the older sister's boyfriend, a friend of mine from school, we watched it together. And all of us, except for the father, were gaga. He was this wonderful British archetype who looked a little like the actor Terry Thomas, and always wore the right kind of tweeds, that little RAF mustache, very special shape. You know, I could listen to these people talk all day. They were so exotic to me at the time. But he just laughed and thought, you know, what a bunch of nonsense and how silly they look. And it's just a flash in the pan. This is not going to last. So a visionary there. Although I can say the very first time I heard the name Beatles in early 1964, being a visionary myself, I thought naming a group after a group of insects is just not going to catch. I missed something early on, but I figured it out since then.
So the crickets.
I know. Exactly.
The crickets, and it was BEATLES.
That changed everything. And
Yep.
I want to know now, when your interest in the subject of unidentified flying objects, I won't even use the UAP term because it was not even a vision in anybody's head at the time. But when that subject first began to capture your imagination, then I'm going to come back to music. Gino, starting with you.
My gosh. You know, I got all kinds of weird stories about that, but really probably back watching Leonard Nimoy.
In Search Of.
And a couple episodes about UFO sightings and whatever 1970, whatever year that was, I don't remember. But watching In Search Of when I was a kid, that's probably what really sparked it to begin with. And I do remember watching a documentary that was on TV at the time. I don't remember what it was called, and if I said it, you probably know it. Flying saucers have landed, flying saucer something or other. Old, you know.
Might have been the Stanton Friedman
LA back in
documentary.
the 70s or something like that, you know.
That would be a good start. Earl, when, and we've talked about this, of course, and been a guest on the show and talking about your amazing mom, but for our viewers and listeners, when did the subject of UFOs and the implications and beings from other places first capture your imagination?
I think I was born with it in me, to tell you the truth, because my mom used to see me climb up the monkey bars of the swing set, and she would yell out the window, "What are you doing? Who are you singing to and waving to?" And I would say, I answered her back. I said, "The space people, Mom. I'm waving and singing to the space people." But my mom did a little disclosure number on me. She worked in officialdom, and she was one of Howard Hughes's secretaries. Yeah. And it's right around the same time that Odetta came into our kitchen, I have rather distinct memory of that same painted yellow, bright yellow, cheery kitchen of my mom sitting down and telling me that she had worked in a deep underground military base. That's at one time. And then she went and said, and oh, by the way, there are space aliens and UFOs are a real thing. Is when I was a little kid, and she thought that I would forget. And to her horror, I didn't. And I even went and did a little show and tell about it at school. And I've recently heard, I had a guy from the DOD tell me, you know, I've actually read your mom's file. I can't read it to you. I'm telling you more than I should. He said, but you can be very proud of your mom. And, you know, your mom actually told on herself when you went and did your little thing in school. We knew about that. And it's like, really? Oh my God.
That's
but
intense.
Apparently she reported on herself because she told me too much, you know. So I grew up knowing, you know, and you know, my big thing was later on, I was interested in I became a fundamentalist Christian for a little while, and I was planning. I was taking pre-seminary classes, and my mom she decided to tell me a little bit more after seeing Star Wars, and I didn't want to hear it. I
Wow.
didn't really mesh with my religious beliefs, so I remember trying that it wasn't real longer than that was a thing for a while.
You are aware, of course, that this is not a standard problem that most of us have with our
No,
mothers.
I know. Well, it makes for a weird life,
Jeff, I'm sorry you have to follow that act, but your first memories, thoughts, interests in the subject of UFOs.
Well, in '64, our family drove back to the New York World's Fair. Earl, I've told this to Earl before. He's aware of what happened.
Oh, yeah.
We were roughly around the area of Monument Valley when this weird gray cloud came out of nowhere, just to our car only, hovered over it and rained only on our car. While this is happening, I remember distinctly like having a conversation in the back seat with the Coyote and the Roadrunner, the cartoon characters.
Wow.
Mind you, I'm 3 years old at the time, about to be 4. And then all of a sudden, my next recollection is coming to screaming during a thunderstorm under the bar at my aunt and uncle's house in Artesia, New Mexico. Incidentally, my uncle was the fire chief there in the Roswell area back during certain incidences that we've heard about. So as a kid, I grew up hearing
Jeff was abducted.
I feel so outclassed.
I had no idea.
In the 60s about, flying saucers and things.
Sure.
That they were real. And I just, I knew my dad, of course, my parents were totally against any of that. In fact, I have very distinct memory of my dad, the veins bulging out in his neck and him red in the face saying, "There's no such thing as UFOs."
Oh my God.
And me as a kid thinking, he's kind of protesting a little bit too much.
Yeah.
But he had a Navy background and I could go into some areas where I'm finding out he might have been involved in some things after the Navy too that led to technical positions and his position at the phone company and stuff. So yeah, as an early child, I kind of knew that even though people didn't talk about it, it wasn't okay to talk about it at the time. I had an understanding that it was a real subject.
Yeah.
It's just you don't talk about it. So and from there it grew. Of course, I had a better sighting later. The one as a kid, that is really weird, and I have that memory. And later on, thinking, after knowing what I know now, it could very well have been some kind of an encounter, which is the only thing that makes sense.
Yeah.
And of course, my parents wouldn't talk about that at all, and they were very scared about talking about anything like that. So I never got any of the, intuition. I wasn't as lucky as Earl to have a parent that admitted these things to me. Fortunately, my aunt and uncle did.
Yeah.
But my dad was so shook up by the subject, even that talking about, say, the Battle of Los Angeles, he didn't want anything to do with, because he was in Monterey Park at the time.
Oh my gosh.
And I guess it really shook him up.
Yeah.
Things he saw then. And I never could get a discussion with him about that occurrence, even right up to his death. And in fact, even in the year before, after, I'd shown pictures to my mom with a famous LA Times photo and, discuss other things with her about the occurrence. And she said, whatever you do, don't discuss it with your dad. He doesn't want anything to do with it. And it just, makes him very upset.
One way for a child to pay particular attention to a subject when you are told and to see the level of resistance in somebody that you know and love.
Well, and then to go
look
through
up to.
school and learning and the institutions, being told certain set of things all through when you know that it was certain set of other things, probably. I always looked at a lot of things differently that a lot of people didn't, and I was looked at as being kind of odd for having that different viewpoint. But I always valued it as, look at the evidence and then make the decision. And it's something I follow through in life later on. Don't follow what you're being told. Look at the evidence yourself and make your own decision on that subject.
As people involved in the world of UFO studies who take the subject very seriously, we all appreciate that the subject has been a springboard for songs, stories, countless films, and some of it is just the white noise that we hear as time passes. If we were going to do a show devoted to UFO themed films that we've seen and discuss it, we could do show after show and just keep talking about the same thing.
It would be a 10-year series.
But exactly. But when I think of songs that are either about or referential to unidentified flying objects, flying saucers, aliens, the implications of contact, or songs that dovetail into it about space, it's such a wide horizon. Everything from silly, superficial novelty songs to songs of great emotional depth to ones that have become kind of anthems for many of us in a way. Other ones that are just, kind of in a place by themselves. I think the very first song that I remember as a little kid having anything to do with the subject was your classic novelty song, One-Eyed, One-Horned, Flying Purple People Eater, which, of course, none of us were intimidated by or thought of any dark or deep implications.
That song with UFOs. I heard it all the time, but I never once associated it with UFOs or aliens.
Do
I
you
put
guys
it in the Magic Dragon category?
remember, again, maybe it was before, with Earl, he was born with it, before your interest was pronounced in the subject or maybe dovetailing with it, the first UFO or alien-related song that you ever heard, Gino, you first?
Probably the first I heard or was aware of, Styx, Come Sail Away. Yeah. Which is funny because I remember listening to it when I was younger. I don't remember the verse about aliens. And years later, I realized because the early version of it, they had the radio edit, which they don't do these days. The radio edit cut out the last verse to make the song shorter. So they didn't always play that last verse on the radio. And then later on, bought the album, and I was like, wait a minute. That's not the song's about aliens. Although nowadays I do play, there's a classic rockabilly song from the 50s from Billy Riley called Flying Saucer Rock and Roll.
Yeah.
And I actually play that with one of my bands quite a bit. And that's always a favorite too.
There is all you need to do is Google it. There is a brilliant song dovetailing with the end of the big band era, because of course we're talking about 1947 here, sung by one of the greatest vocalists of the century, Ella Fitzgerald, called Two Little Men in a Flying Saucer, which it's an earwig. I mean, it's so clever, and it's such a sweet little song. And I'm just saying right now, if you listen to it, you will not be able to get it out of your mind file, but that's okay. It's a lovely, simple, non-threatening song, probably written within months, or the summer of 1947, sold very quickly to one of the most popular singers in America at the time, and kind of marked the beginning of the UFO in music era that accompanied UFOs in our consciousness and in our skies. Earl, do you remember the first UFO themed or alien themed song that you picked up on?
Yeah. It Came Out of the Sky by Creedence Clearwater. It was one of the first songs I ever learned on guitar, and it was one of the
great song. I'm such a huge
I ever played with
band. That's
too.
a great song.
Yeah, That was it. It's a song. It's great.
And Jeff, do you remember the first UFO themed song that stuck in your head?
Absolutely. It was on Axis Bulldog's Love, Jimi Hendrix. First song, EXP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great.
I had a very tiny part in a UFO related song in that in 1976, the Blue Oyster Cult was working up a new album that went on to become maybe the best selling of all time, in part because it had Don't Fear the Reaper on it. It's called Agents of Fortune. Patti Smith had a couple of songs on it. Helen had a couple of songs on it. It went gold and it went platinum. And I attended a number of the recording sessions, some rent a studio in the West 40s in Manhattan. And I was a big expert on UFOs at the time. I had been obsessed with the subject for over half a year. So you could pretty much ask me anything. And one of the most brilliant people I have ever met or been around in my life, but in this case associated with the world of popular music, was Sandy Pearlman, the lead producer for the Blue Oyster Cult, who also kind of created a little band called The Clash, and in the punk era worked with the Dictators. He was simply brilliant. He was one of the most well-read people I ever knew, and we were all just a little intimidated by him. And he had been working up a song about, well, the cover-up, so to say, and picked my brains about it a bit because he knew I had become interested in the subject. I ended up giving him Xeroxes of a number of authentic, declassified UFO documents. Even though this is still before the Freedom of Information Act, there were those documents out there that had been legally declassified. And he really appreciated having his hands on, material like that. It ended up as a song on the album called ETI, Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which focused in on the Men in Black, and a wonderful paranoid anthem. Google it, listen to it. It's a pretty special
album. Yeah,
song.
Great album.
It is. It really is. And I'm particularly proud of my sister on that one. She had Sinful Love, which is a great song. Actually, not that it's public, but dealt with her feelings of creative jealousy, just being alive in the same planet at about the same time as Patti Smith, who remains a very formidable presence in the world of popular culture, God knows. And a song called Nosferatu. Helen was way ahead of the curve, and in the 70s was really fascinated by vampire culture, huge fan of Bram Stoker's. And the thing that caused the writing of that song, to digress for a moment, was actually watching the silent film Nosferatu for the first time. We watched it together. And it is a beautiful, haunting song that Joe Bouchard, still the bass player of the Blue Oyster Cult, did the music for. Anyway, now we're, I guess, about 8 minutes or so from our break. And I want to start to talk about these songs that deal with this subject and the spirit that they were written in. I'm thinking now of kind of a lighthearted, joyous one, which was Hey, Mr. Spaceman by the Byrds, which I thought was a wonderful bookend with like 8 Miles High. Again, this is psychedelic times. A lot of us were doing some pretty serious mind alterations. And it was also one of those early songs that dovetailed into the Beatles' awareness of Indian music. And I sort of thought of them in the same breath. Gino, for you, 1 or 2 or 3 songs that you think about regarding this kind of combination of 2 of your passions, music and UFOs and their implications?
Well, right off the bat, you can't not mention David Bowie.
Starman.
Lots of songs with references to several of my interests, as a matter of fact. But specifically, my very favorite David Bowie song, Starman.
It's such a beautiful song. It still kicks ass. Holy moly.
I listened to it over and over again. So that's my, that's the one.
I can't. It's a beautifully constructed song too, and so beautifully performed.
He's afraid to blow our minds.
More melody on it, simple yet effective.
Again, if you rewatch the videos, just look at the feeling. But perfect choice, Gino.
Yeah, that. And another one, a little more humorous side, but just as interesting. Guitarist that I'm a huge fan of, Steve Vai. He started out playing for Frank Zappa and moved on to many other projects. But early in the 80s, he put out a solo album of just stuff he made at his home studio. And he had a song on there called Little Green Men. Kind of a fun little comical song, but the lyrical content is there. And if you know anything about Steve Vai, he was definitely into the subject himself. So it wasn't written as a lark or as a goof, as much as it sounds like a goof. He was really, really into it. So that's another very good one. So if you get a chance to look up that Little Green Men by Steve Vai.
I got all his albums.
Yeah.
Jeff, for you?
Pardon?
Some UFO themed or alien themed songs that are dear to your heart?
Earl and Gino already mentioned all the ones that I probably would have. Klaatu, of course.
Yeah, Klaatu. Yes.
Major.
Oh,
but
yes.
lately, I can't. When the subject of UFOs and music comes together, the number one thing that comes to my mind is my friend Merle Fankhauser, who you probably all know is. He wrote the song "Wipeout."
Wow.
And then the Safaris recorded it. He had a legal dispute over it for many years before he finally won. And yes, Merle's the guy that wrote it. He had a sighting when he was on the island of Maui, a volcano. He had a pretty significant UFO sighting, and he believes contact with an intelligence. And he wrote a song based on that called Calling from a Star. But not only that, he formed another band after that called Moo. Here, I have to show his book real quick here. Calling from a Star, Merle Fankhauser's story.
Cool.
You can Google him. It's amazing all the music the guy's done. Way more than I had even an inkling of. He lives just a few miles from me. In Arroyo Grande. We got together a few months ago, and we're going to end up doing some webcasts and talks on this. But the fascinating thing about his sighting and the fact that, it led to forming a very successful band and writing a lot of music, much of which UFO related. But it also led him to discover on the island this pyramid, mostly buried in lava flow, that they dated the lava flow to 10,000 years old.
Love it.
I have a MUFON investigator friend of mine who's also, she lives in Hawaii, and she's, very respected among Hawaiian royalty and everything, and allowed access with the elders to investigate these places and go there. And we're trying to narrow down the exact location of where this pyramid is.
Oh.
There's also another building with it that's, I guess, needs more exploring. Merle wasn't able to go into depth into it at the time, and he left the islands. But, it's pretty fascinating that a UFO encounter would lead him to these ruins. And the story about it and the encounter and everything, I think, is very fascinating and one of the more memorable UFO sightings that I've heard of from musicians. But he also turned me on to this other book, Alien Rock.
Yes, I have that, and I was friends with the author.
Yeah, it's just chock full of just about everybody from the late 60s and 70s in music.
And hold that thought. We are about to go to break. We'll be right back. Well, not right back. See you shortly.
Try to escape.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Are we alone in the universe? The most important question facing humanity is on the verge of being settled once and for all. The Mutual UFO Network has been at the forefront of this journey for nearly 50 years. Our members worldwide are dedicated to the research, documentation, and awareness that will shape the future of humanity. Won't you join us?
It's not just a donation.
It's a warm blanket.
It's a bottle of clean water.
It's a roof and a bed.
It's knowing someone cares.
It's feeling safe.
It's a today that's better than yesterday.
Every dollar you can spare helps so much more than you can imagine. Please, donate now to help people affected by Hurricane Ian. Your support is urgently needed.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
You know, there's one in every crowd. Peter Robbins back with Meanwhile Here on Earth. My guest tonight, Gino Marigilano, Earl Grey Anderson, and Jeff Krause. Not to be confused with my friend Jeff Strauss. An easy mistake for me to make, but I didn't do it. And Jeff, that's a plug for you for free anyway. A lot of people maybe who look in on the community of people like us who do our best to contribute to what we know about this overall still highly unknown topic in many respects, probably have a number of preconceptions of what might contribute to making a good UFO researcher, author, investigator. And I think it's fair to say that having a background in science or psychology or history or other pragmatic subjects certainly is a plus. But those of us who have creative backgrounds and not technical ones have another set of skills that we bring to the table. And part of it, I think, is that we are conditioned, taught, have learned automatically don't think within the box. We think in non-standard ways sometimes, and that can bring us closer to the truth here. Your thoughts, Jeff, on the kind of background or backgrounds that come to this, and why a creative background does have not only value, but unique value.
Well, I was dead asleep one night when my phone rang. And normally I don't answer it. But I looked over and I saw the name Earl Grey. And I said, I recognize that name. That's not just a tea I drink every now and then. That's a guy I know on Facebook. So I took a chance and I answered it.
Big mistake.
Holy crap, I've been paying for it ever since. But no, we started talking. And he told me, that he was a musician. And, I had a lot of conversations with people about ufology. And, you get a lot of people that come off as the true believers, and you can pretty much nail them right off the bat. And Earl wasn't one of those. He seemed to be intelligent and have a desire to actually learn about things. So I suggested, why don't you become a field investigator for MUFON? And he did. Lickety split. He did it very quickly. And, it escalated from there. But what really made stand out, as soon as he said he was a guitarist, anyone that's taken an aptitude test for work and has scored very well in it, you see these different things and they tell you what categories scoring best fits into these job descriptions. And the analogies they had were a lot of musicians were very good at being investigators. Now, of course, they didn't say UFO investigators. It was just investigators of any type was one of the fields that you'd be good at because of the critical thinking involved and the way you attack situations.
Yeah.
This is before I knew anything about any of the actual scientific studies done on that.
Interesting.
But I soon read up on these and discovered that, because I was looking for, a path to take myself in life. I've been engineering student and musician and things like that. I never wanted to be like an investigator, like a detective or a cop. And the UFO field always interested me. I'd been researching it and everything else. So, it became natural that I become a UFO investigator. And other people that I knew in the music field, I found had the same aptitude and interests. Here we are, three guys right here just in Southern California in this MUFON team who are guitar players, accomplished musicians, and investigate UFOs. But this is just a microcosm sampling. How many other groups just like us are there out there, where there's, I'm sure that we are not the only guitarists that are investigating UFOs and are fairly competent at it. I'm sure there's many others out there. And that's just one of the traits I think that made it good. Now, I have a military background as well. So I have the exposure to that way of doing things, which is, believe me, way different from the way normal folks do things. I'm a musician, so I know how to be irresponsible through life and still survive. And, I've evolved into even more irresponsible than a guitarist. Now I'm a UFO investigator, which I think is a great accomplishment. I see that as advancement, not falling, backsliding or anything. Because, it's an advancement. It's an ability to learn is the key thing. We're all teachable. Earl's teachable. Chino's teachable. Peter, you're still teachable. We all learn every day. And what's great about us, and I think what is necessary to become successful in any type of investigation, whether it's UFOs or anything else, you've got to be able to evaluate the evidence without any bias whatsoever. I mean, obviously, we have opinions and we're biased to the UFO field that UFOs exist, flying saucers are real, but we can't do our investigation with that bias in the forefront. And you've got to be able to set things aside and look at the evidence and let the evidence do the talking rather than what you want out of it. And that's an ability I think that the three of us have, and that others that want to learn how to investigate this really, that cultivating that is the best thing you can do.
Jeff, that's incredibly well said. You've really covered it. And I'm going to ask Gino.
Good night, folks.
Good. Live radio, folks. It's only a podcast after this show.
Drive safely.
Gino, how do you see your musical talent, your creativity as a performing artist? How has that impacted on your investigations, your skill as an investigator, your sensitivity? Because in a relatively short time, you have become the head investigator for all of Southern California, which is a pretty large MUFON terrain. That's the compliment is right there in terms of the respect that you already have. How do you feel that creative side of you impacts on the investigation research side of you?
Well, aside from a heavy daily dose of imposter syndrome, I think first and foremost, and I think Jeff pretty much touched on it there and made a good point of it, as a musician or an artist, a creative of any kind, you're automatically more open than a non-creative person. And I don't mean necessarily open to say the idea that, aliens exist or, Bigfoot's in my backyard, not that kind of openness, but the openness to be able to see different angles, to see different perspectives, to see avenues that most people might not look for, or create new avenues. That's a certain openness that you're just intuitively have. And I think that helps with being an investigator in general, to be able to see not just points A, B, and C, but to see A, B, C, D, E, F, and the offshoots of all the other ones. It helps with all of that. And as far as the skills from being a musician, I mean, it's just the fact that you have made yourself a musician in general. You've learned music, you perform music. You're being able to combine two completely opposite ideas. You're getting to combine the idea of being completely creative and free, open, more open than, say, your average, pencil pusher or peanut counter. But at the same time, also, you have to really fine tune that critical part of your brain. So you've trained yourself to be very critical and very specific with details.
Yeah,
how things are done. Very
work to play music.
But at the same time, wide open. It's a really bizarre combination of things to try to mishmash together. And that alone, I think, makes an incredible skill to have for an investigator of any kind.
Yeah, I forgot to mention the incredible, work it takes to become a musician in the first place. I mean,
you're wiring your brain.
We've done it all our lives. We're guitar players, yeah, but I guess kind of forgetting all the hours of practice. I don't know about you guys, but when I was younger, my social life really sucked. I spent about 18 hours a day locked in the closet playing my guitar.
Yep, still do.
At this point, I'm going to ask you, Earl, where you feel that line between your creative and your very right-brained investigatory sense inform each other, if you know what I mean. Just extrapolate on that.
Yes. Well, first of all, I just want to say how proud I am and how much I love these two guys that I get to be on this show with today. You know, I mean, Jeff was my first UFO mentor. If I'm good at what I do, Jeff, it's your fault, you know. And I always say that, as you know, he's read interviews and heard interviews. And Gino, you know, I just saw the wonderful potential in him. I saw the wonderful work he did on his cases and how just, you know, he would just could zoom in on stuff. And if it was something that was an IF, you know, an identified flying object, he just had intuition, you know. And it's like, well, you know what, Jeff made me chief investigator, so I'm going to return the favor and I'm going to do that for Gino. And I'm so happy because he's an absolute natural. But I think that, you know, intuition is one of the biggest qualities that a musician can have and that can help you in this field, because music doesn't really have rules. Okay. Even classical music, you know, once you get to Stravinsky and Berlioz and, you know, it starts getting a little more abstract but intuition, I think, and just synchronicity too. There's that idea of the Akashic record where everything of beauty, everything of worth is already there. It sort of surrounds us. But as artists, we kind of reach in and we're able to pull that back, you know, here, meanwhile on Earth, right? We bring it to Earth, you know, that which is sort of out there and unformed, nebulous. And you know, ufology is the same way. I mean, I personally, I know a hell lot about UFOs, but do I understand this phenomenon? No, I do not. You know, I mean, is it space aliens? Is it ultra dimensionals? Is it, you know, us from the future? Is it, you know, something Campbellian where we're, you know, I mean, Greg, if you were here, you could talk about his theory of how we co-create these, you know, with this other intelligence that he believes is in another dimension, you know, and we sort of call these UFOs into existence. But it's like this co-creation thing, Lennon-McCartney with an alien being kind of. And so you have to be open. You can't have presuppositions about this. And also, like Gino and Jeff are both saying, you have to keep your skeptic hat on too. I mean, it's this balancing act where you have to be a skeptic, but you have to be so open-minded that, you know, Jeff, I'm not going to give you another quarter. I'm going to let you say it this time. What I have to point to you the right way.
Keep an open mind, but not so open that the brain falls out. Okay.
That's right. Don't let your brain
Wise
fall
words,
out.
especially
Yes.
for the safety and protection of your brain. I'm actually having an experience right now rereading a book, and it's bringing all of this together in a way I haven't really experienced in some time. Less than a year after I became obsessed with this subject, I met another painter who had also become extremely focused on it, and we began an acquaintanceship over this subject, and of course the art world and our lives in New York. This was 5 years before Bud Hopkins had published Missing Time. He was not known in any way as involved in this field. But of course, he did his work, and in 1981, that book was published. And it put him on the map, to put it mildly, in terms of being a pioneer in the field of abduction studies. 6 years later, it was followed by Intruders, smash bestseller, and a book we've all read. And other books followed, but the case that I think is considered as most controversial is Witness, the Brooklyn Bridge UFO abduction case. And several weeks ago, I had Linda Corteil on as my guest, and it brought back a lot of stuff in that for the 5 years, Bud investigated that one event as his primary focus, of course, continuing other casework as well. Was a 5-year period where I worked on and off as his assistant, although that went on for more than half of our 35-year friendship. The reason I bring it up right now is Hopkins got into this work with no training whatsoever at all in anything approaching investigation. But because he was extremely smart, had a great facility with the English language, was just a natural investigator. I used to joke with him sometime that if he had gone into law enforcement rather than painting and sculpture, God help the criminal element of New York City. He was something else. And I'm going to wait another 60 seconds before turning the floor over to you, Jeff. Just that I'm rereading Witnessed, and I'm totally caught up in it. I had forgotten how intense not just the abduction-related material was for this woman, who I'm just amazed sometimes that she kept her sanity and survived. But the pressure on her from actual human individuals with security clearances who had been involved in this story in a very visceral way, just, I thought to myself, even this afternoon, thinking, here's a point where he's bringing back this moment where Linda is now being informed of new information that has come to him via Dan or Richard, and reading the letter to her with witnesses and on camera, all with her permission, of course, and the nuance that he captures the reality of this for her. I mean, it's one thing to get the technical details right, but to weave in the humanism, the extraordinary pressure people are put under, and sometimes crack, a great deal of compassion, a great deal of feeling, and being able to write in a way that creates a picture of people in the room and not just the data. A lot we can learn. Jeff, pick up.
I just wanted to say real quick, that's one of my favorite all-time cases. However, as far as quality investigators go, Peter, I know that one book we don't talk about anymore is a blemish because of, well, that other guy that we won't mention.
It's okay.
But the investigations you did in that book are some of the best that I've read or that I've learned about in the field from, and I use it as a standard of excellence when teaching my investigators on how to look at evidence, how to examine evidence, how to gather evidence, how to evaluate evidence. I think what you documented over that 10 years deserves more credit than anyone can ever bestow upon you. And, screw what anyone else thinks about the book, the investigation, that friggin' forest in England, or anything else. You showed character and exemplitude in the field. And I mean in the field literally, because you were in the friggin' field, boots on the ground, doing the job that we all love to do. Now, you know what? Not many people do that and write about it as well as you did. So, man, you're one of my idols and mentors in this field myself, besides being a really good friend.
Well, thank you.
I have my first edition, signed first edition behind me, but there you go. Yes.
You can always talk about that book. It was a blow finding out years after the fact that my former co-author invented, created, injected himself into the situation very cleverly, and that I bought it, and that because I did my job as well as I did, the list of people that bought it is an embarrassing pantheon of people that all respect in the field.
We all know what happened. It doesn't discredit the investigation, the occurrence, or you. It only discredits the one person who was full of the cow pies. That's it.
if one reads or rereads the book, as far as I'm concerned, I can't even tell you what's truth and fiction relative to my former co-author's account. But what I can do is tell you that there are hundreds of annotated, footnoted facts in that book that I will always stand by, that I'll always be proud of.
There you go.
History of the area, the fact that I learned a lot because it took so long to write. I became a better writer in the process. And once the scandal really blew up, I had two choices. There's the kind of tough guy choice, the Dick Cheney choice. My way or the highway. Real men don't apologize. You know, admitting you're wrong is for sissies. And, you know, which is so effed up. For me, it was a matter of just, yep, I got this really wrong for a long time. So let me spend a year or two and, you know, depressurize, etc. But what you just said means more to me than I can say, Jeff, and I really appreciate it.
That's totally heartfelt, brother. Totally.
And you remind me that in the course of working on it, a number of musicians connected with us about, well, musicians, again, most artists are free spirits to a degree. They don't really care what other people think about what they think about certain things. If you are a successful musician spending a lot of time on the road, you're probably reading a lot. And once again, your choices are not determined by society or whatever. I'm remembering about 10 years ago when I was still employed by the city of Roswell to help put together their conferences. And the thing I'm most proud of for some years was the liaison between the mayor's office in Roswell and Governor Richardson, and was back and forth with their office a number of times on a number of issues. But we had the Jefferson Starship play at one of the conferences. It cost a lot, but it was less than their usual rate. They wanted to be there. They wanted to visit Roswell. They did a great, great show. And it included covers of pretty much every UFO related song you can think of, from Have You Seen the Saucers, from The Airplane on. And after the show, midnight until about 3 a.m, we all went to my favorite restaurant in town and drank and talked. I think there were 5 of them at the time, and 3 of them had had serious UFO sightings and no real information on the subject. So, you know, kind of came together in a wonderful way. But Emerson, Lake and Palmer, is it Greg Palmer?
Carl Palmer.
Greg Lake.
Greg Lake.
Okay, there you right. Wrote to us that they loved the book, were fascinated by the subject, and if it was ever made into a movie, could he be considered to write the soundtrack? Well, thank God it wasn't made into a movie, but what can you say? Yes, we'll consider you. How can I say? We, people in the creative arts, kind of are born with giving ourselves permission to dream bigger and wilder sometimes than the next person over. And, you know, how creativity kind of snakes into different forms. When Bowie had already established himself as a leading singer-songwriter in the world of popular culture in the early 70s, when he starred in that wonderfully quirky film, The Man Who Fell to Earth, I thought this must have been as natural as breathing for him. Just kind of organically going from one form to the other. Does that trigger anything for you guys in terms of, you know, great musicians and people who kind of set the tone for you and maybe had a song or songs that pulled these two passions of yours together, but then manifested it in yet one more area, like film? That ring any particular resonance for you guys?
Pink Floyd, you know, if you've ever been to a Pink Floyd concert, you know that they were influenced by not just World War II, but a lot of occurrences since then. I believe David Gilmour had a significant sighting, and Roger Waters as well. I think his is even detailed in that one Alien Rock book. But you get the sense when you see their the visuals that go with a lot of their music videos that it's inspired by the thought of traveling through the universe, and they've had inspiration from space type influences, the general genre of
Controls for the Heart of the Sun. You know that one by Pink Floyd?
We grew up, Earl and I grew up during what I like to call the golden age of science fiction, where, Saturday mornings or Sunday mornings on KH9 in LA, we could get some of the cheesiest sci-fi movies available to man.
Oh, yes.
And it was fodder for every kid's imagination. I don't think I'd have grown up the same without half of those movies, which I guarantee you I could not sit through 75% of them today. But back at the time, they were totally thrilling and left you with the sense of what if.
Absolutely.
And that was great to spark the imagination with that type of availability. I don't see any of it on TV these days. I suppose on the internet, if you did a search, you'd find all kinds of
now,
I'm being boomer now. Gosh, in my day we had.
Okay, boomer.
Great time because you couldn't talk about UFOs openly. Anyone that did was a kook.
Of course.
But you could talk about the science fiction movie and the
there you go.
The aliens and what went on there, and
very safe.
Just being creative. So it was an outlet where you could let it run and have fun with it. But at the same time, you were going under your breath. Well, what isn't this kind of like real still?
Jeff, you remind me. There are songs that have such an impact on us growing up, and they just stay in our hearts, even if they're in your face. They stay in our hearts. For me, one of those songs was "Wild Thing" from the Trogs, which is it's a simple headbanger. It's just great. And I mean, we're talking, I think, the 60s here, but Reg Presley, who was the lead singer, was not just interested in UFOs, he was a researcher. It never led to publishing a book or anything, but it fascinated him. And the very first UFO talk that I gave in the UK, along with my co-author at the time, was in Nottingham for a group that was local. I forget their acronym, East Midlands UFO Research Group, M4. And Reg came to it. And afterwards, we went out drinking. He came by the next morning to have breakfast with us. And it was basically, I did that song, but it's neither here nor there. Let's talk UFOs. And I think it's 3 or 4 days ago. He's been gone for a year or two. And I will never forget just how, normally it would be hero worship, even if it's just one iconic song like that. Oh my gosh, here you are. And it was just, that's just something that I wrote sometime, but let's talk UFOs. It's one of those subjects that can bring people together far faster and far closer. Just preliminaries aside, here we are.
Are you guys familiar with the ET newsroom at all? That was from the UK as well, I believe. They put together this CD here called Eclectia, kind of a take on Sgt. Pepper's on the cover there.
Yeah. Oh, great.
But it's a bunch of musicians on the back. You can see there. And Merle Fankhauser's on this as well, but other musicians. And Graham Hancock's on this as well. Musicians who their music's inspired by UFO encounters. all of it. And then they also they do a oration, talking about their UFO encounter and how it related to their music and why they wrote it. So if you get a chance, you might want to try and order a copy of this. It's called Eclectia. Merle had a copy at his house that he gave me, but it's like really cool music I'd never heard of on here, but it's all UFO related and it's really good. It's worth a listen. Not only that, the stories that the musicians tell about their UFO encounters is great. It's worth getting.
I want to change topics for a moment. Gino, we're just getting to know each other. I've known these two guys for longer than anybody should have to know anybody, but we love each other, so it works out. In just some background chat with Earl about you, I was happily kind of taken aback a bit that you have particular interest in a genre that I got involved in inadvertently. It wasn't my intention, but when you have a sister like I had, it happens. The early days of punk and how that genre has, become not just a legitimate, respected form of music, but how it evolved, etc. What was it first that interested you about it, and any favorite artists, and how did that interest grow?
It's one of those things where you grow up a certain age, like the 70s into the 80s, and you get into rock and roll. And it's just there. It's part of the scenery. I say every kid knows who the Ramones are. I mean, now, yeah, but
they have a good UFO song.
Even then, when I was a kid, everybody heard of the Ramones. People, everybody knew who Iggy Pop was, at least to some degree. So it was always there in the background. It was just something that you pick up on as you go. And over the years, I just kind of get more and more interested in different types of music. And I'll go off on a jag. I really like this one thing, and I'll start listening to all of it. And then I'll find all the offshoots, and then I'll read all the books about it, and I'll watch all the documentaries. Obsessed with it. But that whole vibe, that whole CBGB scene, I mean, that's iconic. I mean, I want to say it is for everybody, but at least for my generation, it was, because we were too young to really be there or know what it was, but not so old that we don't get it.
I've got a big booklet of punk CDs out in my shed that I haven't listened to in years, with like Brand X, Dead Kennedys, Plasmatic.
Yeah.
Saw them all live.
Just a love of early rock and punk. And for me, it's probably more of an interest in, I get very into the history of the band, of the history of them, where it came from, their influences, and who knew who, and where they started, and who had lunch that one day by accident.
Exactly. For me, that started when I was a painting student years ago, of how and which artists influence each other in what manners, and how rich a history it is, and how hard it is to share with people who are like, who cares if Mondrian, was influenced by Manet? I care, but I wanted to share with you, and just thought it would be fun, because I've never had an opportunity to do it on this show. Just my kind of genesis in it. It was 1975. And my sister had established herself as a poet, was making her living in great part sewing one-of-a-kind leather outfits for major rockers, including everybody in the BOC, and a new band that had just appeared on the scene that was called The Dictators, and who became friends of mine because they were friends of Helen's. And she told me about this new club, a real hole in the wall kind of bowl, just skinny as a bowling alley and half the size. I think 175 person fire limit, New York City fire regulations, that was having all these new bands there, and how much she was enjoying them. And she loaned me some CDs. And my first reaction was, looking back on it, oh my God, I sound like my father when I was like 18 years old. You call that music? I grew up with classic rock and roll and heavy metal and doo-wop and Motown and thrash
and they were making
metal.
something new and different.
This is And she said, no, you've got to really be part of it. You got to see it. You got to be there. I just wasn't getting it. And so I meet her at her apartment on East 6th Street, and we walk over the few blocks to CBGB's, which of course stood for Country, Bluegrass, Bluegrass.
Blues.
Yeah, Country Bluegrass.
Country Bluegrass, blues.
Have any of you seen the film, the CBGB's? It's a drama starring Alan Rickman playing Hilly Crystal. It's a great fun, very sweet, very heartfelt, not far from the truth. And we walk in, and here's this cheerful little hellhole with every square inch of the walls covered with either graffiti or posters or whatever. And Hilly's daughter sitting at the door, and Helen walks in, nice smile. We pay our $5 or whatever. And she says, this is one of the best bands in this whole punk thing. I said, well, you know, what? She says, they're 4 guys from Queens, and they're just very deadpan. They call themselves the Ramones. All right. We get up to the front of the apron of the stage, and they come out. And 20 minutes later, I had been touched by this form. First, what you don't get if you just listen to it is the acts are wonderfully outrageous. My God, back then, to see, well, I can't even say the name on the radio. The
Buzz, those guys.
The Sick, F apostrophe S. A group that was fronted by still 2 dear women in my life, Tish and Snooky Belomo, who came out on that stage in, how can I say, cut off nuns' habits, fishnet stockings, stiletto heels, and started to sing a medley of their best songs, including Chop, Chop, Chop Up Your Mama. Each one of them carrying a stage axe, dripping ketchup. And then at the instrumental, each one of them taking their microphones and kind of performing a symbolic sex act on that microphone and standing there at the apron of the stage, just totally caught up in this vibration, thinking, is it possible to fall in love with 2 sisters at the same time? And Helen by then had her band thing pretty much together. And they opened for Iggy. They opened for the Talking Heads a number of times. They opened for the Ramones, and on down the Pantheon. And I just started to go whenever she went. And then I got to meet Debbie Harry, who I am still working my way through that crush. Debbie came, and Chris Stein came to my second ever UFO talk. And I think they were the first ones in the hall. It was a rental hall on East 23rd Street. And in they come, sit front row center, and that woman smiles at me. I'm still recovering from it. It was so much fun. It was so creative. It was brilliant. And at the same time, that same feeling that I would get sometimes working for Bud of, well, in a very different way, this is important. Someday this will be recognized for what it is. And the same thing at CB's. These are wonderful musicians. They're brilliant performers. And, you know, it's a new genre. It's legitimate and it's cool. But I thought I should show you some pictures because Helen, like all of the early performers in the genre, they made it up as they went along. You know, it's like not quite D.W. Griffith as the beginning of the filmmaking era, but these were clever, creative kids. This is Helen with her very first band. That's 1976. And they had lots of attitude. This is a shot of the Ramones playing at CB's, and it was in, I'm trying to remember, my favorite British UFO rock monthly magazine. I'm blanking on the subject, but you see center right, a woman with black hair, and her right arm exposed there. That's Helen. And it's verifiable because if you were to go in close with better optics, you'd see her amazing wrist tattoo on her left wrist there, which was done by one of the first really great not tattooists, but tattoo artists working in New York in the mid-'70s, Ruth Martin. And first band again.
Great shot.
Helen in high school was a cheerleader and a very kind of wholesome character. And except I think toward the end of her cheerleading career, she possibly through me discovered the wonderful world of marijuana. And I remember hearing about from some of her buddies that at the end, when they all cartwheeled this way, she cartwheeled that way. But that move, that was a cheerleading move that she worked for years after, and usually at the end of songs. Now, this is something that's kind of disappeared, and it's just part of history. And for me, I love them, and I have her archive. Zines, The Wonderful World. Well, I mean, for me, highly collectible, just these great cultural artifacts that people would, run off on Xerox machines.
Well, that's where the name for punk came from, was one of the local zines.
Exactly.
And that, yeah.
This photo was taken by Kate Simon. I actually have photos of Kate that I've taken. She emerged as one of the great photographers of that era. Now, this we were all really excited about because, Jesus, here's Iggy and Patti Smith and the Dead Boys being referred to, but Helen is on the cover.
Awesome.
That's
great. Wow.
It is. That wasn't lost on any of us. My sister really kicked major ass in this. A graphic that we put together. And she was very creative on a number of fronts. She was a graduate of the French Fashion Institute in New York, made all of her own costumes, a brilliant dresser and creator. Also a terrific graphic artist. I mean, I've worked with her on so many of these things. Also in 76, she surprised me by saying, guess who's I'm seeing? What boyfriend now? And I thought, and she said, Robert Crumb. And I remember that feeling of, I'm very proud and I'm insanely embarrassed at the same time. Our Crumb? I don't even want to, don't tell me anything. Helen, we were very close brother and sister and shared a lot of stuff, but gee whiz, don't tell me any of that. And Robert, bless his heart, who I actually, I'm not in regular contact with him, but we were back and forth last year. He adored her. And I think this is one of his more flattering portraits of any woman that he ever drew in his life, often with floppy dog's ears, giant asses, and big black noses. But I still think it's a wonderful portrait.
Can't even say the name of one of his characters on the radio.
No, you can't, and you shouldn't. This is another thing. Flyers. A show would be coming up, and out we'd go at midnight with a bucket of paste and put them up all over the Lower East Side. And Helen, if she was really inspired, you'd trifold them. We'd either hand address them, or she had stickers after a while for addresses of people on her mailing list. And each one of them would get a little bit of hand touch-up here, the fingernails and the lips. And this is a Kate Simon photo as well. And there's the real deal. But she had such a sense of style at that time that everybody was coming up with their own stuff. This is one of my very favorite all-time photos of my dear deceased sister sitting on the riser at CBGB's, drooling Bud Light and trying to look menacing. And she could do it. She could do it. But I thought,
it's the Bud Light part that really makes it scary.
Eat your heart out that you never had a sister like this. Also, I believe, if I remember correctly, this Helen used knives in her act. And I guess I'm responsible for introducing blank guns. It was at a time when none of those pesky laws about things that look like guns were hampering us. And I surprised her once. I think they were about $6 each. I bought her half a dozen 22 caliber Saturday night special little handguns. They didn't shoot bullets, but blanks were as loud as real bullets. And it inspired her, along with the Dead Kennedys, whose big song at the time, was 2 Down, 1 to Go, which we all loved. And, we understood the spirit. We really didn't want to see any more Kennedys killed. But Helen we'd sit in the dressing room before the show, and we'd load the pistols. And when she'd go out to do that song, they were all stuck in her waistband. And this is way before, a decade, 2 decades before anybody thought of a mosh pit. Well, the song that she wrote was called Gray Matter in the Streets of Dallas. And it rhymed malice with Dallas, and the chorus was, oh, Jackie, oh, no, oh, Jackie, oh, no, oh, no. And when the band would do its instrumental, Helen would get into the 2-hand pose and start shooting people in the audience. Many of them waving, me, Helen, me. And of course, all of them in the great spirit of the moment, when they were shot, with great flair would fall on the floor. And if things worked out well at the end of the set, almost everybody in the audience in the front of the CBs would be on the floor with just enough people left alive to catch her when she jumped off the stage.
Wow.
That's amazing.
That's great. Oh my God.
Uh-oh. Did Peter lock up?
Are you here, Peter?
The ice froze
on here.
Oh, there he is.
Again, continuing to work on the menacing look. And again, the golden age when you could still smoke indoors, for God's sakes. What's wrong with people?
Got it. Girls with tattoos back then.
This was not the way it is now. And that was major. When my sister got her first tattoo, I remember, not that we're Orthodox Jews and worrying about being buried in consecrated ground, but they're touchy about tattoos. And I remember, I think my father saying something about it, like he could have cared less in terms of religion. But yeah, most nice girls who grew up in the suburbs didn't have them. Ah, there you go. There you go.
Wow.
Killing
okay, there
another
you go.
Fabulous fan.
Flying gun. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Again, original band. And she was, even before she mastered her vocalizations, because she studied for some years with a great coach, Susan Dorchin, who is a remarkable woman and coached opera singers. But Helen was one of the first rockers to see, I really should study with somebody who really knows the business. And she studied with Susan, but before she mastered her voice, she was still an electrifying performer.
Wow.
This is sort of second, third band. Still one of my dearest friends in the world at the lower left, Albert Bouchard. The Peppermint Lounge.
Wow.
This picture and the next, I think are wonderful. Rick Carroll is a terrific photographer and an old friend from the rock scene going back to the 70s. He took this picture, which is on the cover of her last CD. And the CD came out within a few weeks of her death, and they had contacted me about, the band had contacted me about this photo, and I had taken almost an identical one. And I said I took it, and I didn't. So I forever, when I show this picture, Richard Carroll, you are the best. And thank you for being a good sport, that my name is where your name should be on that CD. Her friend Mariah Aguiar, a dear friend who's gone now also, but very talented photographer, took this one and some of her other best photos. It's another Rick Carroll. Wow. Also, Helen, kind of coming out of her stage injuries, got very involved in female bodybuilding. And at one point, I think was the first, second or third ranking woman in her bodybuilding class in America. She was 4'11", but she didn't take shit from anybody. And it was a way to just take better care of herself. This was a French photographer. I remember this was a great session. And then we had just finished photographing, and we're coming into our last couple of minutes, and I'm taking it all, but I don't care. We had just done a shoot for a single that she had done, and the late, great Armin Khachaturian, who had a wonderful studio on East 23rd Street overlooking Madison Square Park. Helen and I were up on the roof goofing around, and he just got some shots of us. That's not a backdrop. That's the New York Life Insurance, very metropolis looking background there. But
love it. I haven't seen all those. I've seen one of those, Peter. Those are great.
Helen and Albert. Another CBGB. And just to close, picture of us when we were kids, about the time that we had our UFO experience. This is in New Hampshire. I never noticed it for decades, but it was called to my attention once I started to show this picture. I just thought it was always, cracking the emulsion or a problem with the actual, maybe it was just some dirt on it, but there are some unknowns in the sky there. My two amazing sisters. And I think this is actually a very good note to close on, because this is also my sister.
Wow.
This is a series of drawings she did from memory and recovered memory for Bud Hopkins, who is a dear friend of hers and a dear friend of mine, of course. And I thought we could close on a kind of classic note. 40 years ago or so, I spent some time as the official photographer for the Blue Oyster Cult. And I got to stand on stage or sit on stage when everybody else in the audience was in the audience. And it was such an exciting time for me. And these are not telephoto shots. This is a normal lens.
More cowbell, Peter.
Well, you made a note of that. I played cowbell on some of Albert's songs. He is the one that the spoof was about. But I did get once to sing Don't Fear the Reaper on stage with the Blue Oyster Cult.
Fine.
Alan Lanier died much too soon, one of the great keyboard players in the history of rock. And that's one I'm really proud of. Dressing room, Albert and Alan and his then girlfriend, Patty.
Dang.
And I know it's 1975 there because Helen's hair went magically red in the next year. But this is backstage at a BOC concert, and a shot of Patty that I got that I always liked a lot that has never actually been shown publicly.
Wow.
Anyway, music, UFOs, extraordinary combination. I want to thank you all.
Fun show.
I had so much fun tonight, and it was really sweet. And Jeff, thank you again for your kind comments. They mean more to me than you imagine. But Jeff, Gino, Earl, a big hug to you all. It's been a great 2 hours, and we'll figure out some excuse to have you guys back on again. Start thinking about it now. Stay well.
Part two. We didn't even get into certain.
It's all done then.
Peter, hop on an airplane, fly out here to California. We want you to have dinner with us.
Oh, yes, I'll do it. And right now we're out of time. So thank you so much. Stay well, fight for what you believe in, and be kind to each other. See you next week.